to We Chat Divorce with Karen Shalhoub, Legal Liaison, and Catherine Shanahan, CDFA, co-founders of My Divorce Solution, the company that delivers the quintessential financial blueprint to couples facing or going through the divorce process. This blueprint, known as the MDS Financial Portrait, establishes the foundation and options an individual or couple would need to make clear financial decisions when considering divorce. Each podcast, Catherine and Karen sit down with divorce professionals and other individuals who provide insight and frank discussion about real people, real situations, and real divorce. Okay, today we welcome Elizabeth Billies, also known as Liz Billies. For the last 10 years, Elizabeth has been working as a divorce attorney in suburban Philadelphia at the law firm of Dischell Bartle and Dooley. During this time, she's represented hundreds of men and women going through separation and divorce. In doing so, she's learned a few, maybe more than a few things about relationships and the divorce process. In addition to her family law practice, Ms. Billies also operates her blog called The Divorce Lawyer Life, where she provides her readers with practical tips to help them expertly navigate the divorce process to their best post-life divorce. Or their post-divorce life, I should say. Welcome, Liz. And today we're going to be talking about family-owned businesses. So that's a very unique and seems to be very trending topic right now. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on your podcast and also talk about this topic. As we were talking before, it's interesting how everything kind of trends, and for some in family-owned businesses, in divorce cases, and the unique obstacles, issues that those bring up have been very prevalent recently, which has been interesting. I don't think COVID, not COVID related, but just have been coming up for me. So I'm glad to talk about this with you today.
Yeah. So there's generational family-owned businesses. Mm-hmm. And then I guess the other type of family-owned business is husband and wife family-owned businesses.
Yes. So I've had the husband and wife business. I've had the generational business. And all of these bring along their own dynamics. And we can, and then I also have had a couple recently of same generation siblings owned businesses. Mm-hmm. And all family owned businesses are first family owned businesses versus a business where partners are not related. So arm's length, third party businesses, if you want to call it, for lack of a better word, there's different things that you look at in a family owned business versus a third party business. And then also, if we're going to drill down even further, is it the generational business, the husband and wife business, and then the, lateral generational, the sibling-owned business, right. Or they have their own dynamics as well. And it's which, first of all, in the consult, so what I do when I first talk to, someone comes in to see me, I have what's called an initial consult. And so we get into, the assets that are owned by the couple, and right away, hopefully they'll identify for me the business.
Well, let me ask you this. When you say you dropped it down from family-owned siblings and so forth, but isn't it also interesting what side of the case you're on?
So, for sure. Yes.
Because that's another segment I would like to zone in on today.
Definitely. Access to information is key, or lack of access to information is frustrating.
And perspective. And perspective.
Also, yes, I always, and it's also interesting when you have the business owner, you have access to the books and records of the business, for lack, we can talk about specifically what those kind of documents are and what I recommend people should be looking for when there is a family-owned business involved, but books and records in general, it's for right now. So when you have access to the books and records, your job is easier. When you don't have access,
what do you look for?
Okay,
if you have access.
Sure. So it also depends on whether or not you're working with a business evaluation expert. Because they will, generally what I do is if I know I'm going to hire a business expert to value the business, or I think I'm going to need one, because some businesses, it's not clear right away if it's a marital asset or if it's just an income stream. Because, and now, obviously, as you said, I'm barred in the state of Pennsylvania, so I'm going to talk about Pennsylvania law specifically. There is some differences in states versus how you value a business and whether or not a business is a marital asset and whether or not the whole business is a marital asset. It's called enterprise goodwill versus personal goodwill. So personal goodwill in Pennsylvania you can't divide that. It's not an asset to divide. Enterprise goodwill is divisible. So in some states the whole thing is divisible. Some states have different views on personal enterprise goodwill. So I will preface this with that caveat.
Well, just to clarify that for our listeners who may not know, personal goodwill is if you are a hairdresser and that business is run by just you cutting hair, or it's a personal, can you just further define how you would look at personal goodwill?
Yeah, so personal goodwill, I always say is whether I always use a dry cleaner as an example. I don't know why, I just do. Personal goodwill is someone coming to this business because of me. The hairdresser example is primary. And what could I sell as a hairdresser? If I was selling my hairdresser business, what am I selling? Shampoo, my hair dryer. Usually you rent a chair, you rent a space. There's not much to sell. You're not really selling your book of business because I can't sell, my clients aren't necessarily going to stick with you. They don't have a contract with me to cut their hair. They go with me because I do a good job. They like how I cut their hair. That's personal goodwill.
What about the owner that says, well, I own this business and they're only coming because of me. They know nothing about you as the spouse and they're only coming because of me. When in reality, that might be their personal perception of the business. But like you say, there's not a contract with husband or wife. It is just they like the service it provides. And if they sold it, if it provided the same service, they would get it.
Well, I actually had a case like that. I had it with a dentist. And so he owned the dental practice, owned the business that the dental practice was in, obviously owned the equipment in the building, but there were other dentists in that office. So the question was, if husband stopped being a dentist at that office today, would everybody leave? And the answer was no. Now he's a great dentist. Even my client, I represented the wife, thought he was a great dentist. Apparently he's very, I have not used his services personally, but he has, had great recommendations. So maybe some people would leave, but in reality, most of those people are going to probably be subsumed by the other dentists there. The people like the location, they like the hygienist. I mean, as we all know, the hygienist spend a lot of time with you more than the dentist does usually. So in that case, we found, okay, there is probably a portion of the value that is personal to that dentist, but the overwhelming value of that business was enterprise goodwill. And we hear that all the time.
So as a tip, if you're listening and your spouse tells you that the business would go away because they're not there, don't necessarily believe that.
Definitely don't. Definitely do not. I hear it all the time. And particularly if you have a brick and mortar location, that's generally not going to be true, because people, like going back to my dry cleaner example, people go to that dry cleaner. Yes, they clean your clothes. That's great. But it's also where the dry cleaner is located. It's also whether or not they can get my shirts, starched in 24 hours. Yeah. They're not going because the lady behind the counter is certainly lovely, but that's not necessarily why they're going there. And so then there's businesses that are so one way, that's all enterprise goodwill. No one, everyone's a cog in a wheel. Then you've got the solely personal and, personal goodwill, which are generally really one-man band, one lady band, general contractors, landscapers sometimes, just really a revenue stream. There's really no assets of the business. That's a personal goodwill. I generally, if I can, and I've been doing this a long time, I'll always check it with a business expert if I'm unclear, but there's certain ones that's pretty obvious to me. And then there's the ones that are probably somewhere in the middle that are, maybe there's a little bit of personal goodwill with the owner or spouse. And then but majority of it is enterprise goodwill, particularly if there's significant physical assets and contracts.
So can you how do you define enterprise goodwill now that we define personal goodwill?
Sure. So enterprise, so when you do a business valuation, you're looking at what a willing buyer would pay for this business. So what could I get for it if I sold it? They're not getting me, right? So what are they getting if I'm out of the picture as the owner? What am I selling? Is there contracts? Is there a brick and mortar location? Is it a manufacturer or some kind of company that has significant assets, equipment, dental practices? They got the chairs, they have x-ray machines. There is physical assets in that business. So what could somebody buy? That's an enterprise goodwill. What am I getting as a third party over here? Now, what's interesting with family-owned businesses is, and let's talk about the husband and wife business. Yeah. You might have two sets of personal goodwill. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. And then,
what each bring to the table.
Exactly. You don't know. Say, let's use a bakery as an example. Maybe, wife is the pastry chef and husband is the marketer and he's the one who gets the contracts, or he makes some other kind of food. Like she does the pastries and he's the great coffee maker, or, so without one of them, does the business is only half of what it was. It doesn't have that person there anymore. That's a really interesting argument. And a really interesting thing to try to tease out what everybody's personal goodwill is. Most cases, you've just got one person. Majority of my cases, I have had husband and wife owned businesses. The majority of them is one person. One half of the couple is in the family owned business, usually with parents. Is usually the number one that I see generational businesses. But the husband and wife.
Go ahead.
So that is and that brings itself again another family dynamic. Right. Especially if you represent the person who's not in the spouse. So I had one that was an intergenerational business. It was parents and son. And it's, what does wife know about the business? They were married a long time. What does wife know? And so I was on that side of I was on the side of the business owner. So I had access to the information. I had access to the parents. I had access to the controller, the business accountant, the tax preparer. Wife doesn't have access to any of those things. And that's very common. When you have an intergenerational or a sibling business, the non-business owner spouse is out. And so, but what they do have is what they remember from the marriage. And so that's where if you have, they may not have been involved in the day-to-day, but they don't know, they know something.
Yeah.
And so
particularly the lifestyle.
And also, and as the number one thing that you hear about in businesses is cash. Always hear about cash. It's always cash, which I have found as we've moved to almost a cashless society at this point, like there really isn't as many cash. I mean, the pizza shop is always the example that everybody uses, but like most businesses now, there's just not as much cash anymore. But I hear about you'll hear about cash. You will also hear, and this is one of the issues for a family-owned business that you see as different than a third-party business, is running personal expenses through the business. That is something that the non-business owner spouse is going to know about. They know who is making their car payment. They know who is paying their, for the family trip to Disney. That was a business retreat. They know all that stuff.
Right. So what if you're the spouse and you assume that your husband or wife, whoever it is, puts his shares back into the parent's name in this generational business in preparation of divorce? How do you prove that?
So divorce planning, Divorce planning, I have to say, divorce planning happens less than people think. In my experience, people think people plan. Also, divorce planning is super obvious because we're not in a cash-based society. Like if you transfer money out of an account, like it's super obvious. Like it's, it's because it's transfer, there's documents for everything. So if someone transfers their shares, and this is an issue also for support and retained earnings. Retained earnings is another divorce planning tool that you will often see in a family-owned business. But if someone were to transfer their shares back, you're going to look at, well, why did they do that? What was the reason? Was it because, and how far, what's the proximity to the date of separation? So if it's, 6 months before, like red flags are going to, red lights are going to go off. Why would you transfer it back?
Yeah.
I sold my shares to my parents. Why? Usually it's the other way around. Did I sell it because they loaned me money and that was my way to pay them back? Was this an inheritance scheme, which you see a lot in intergenerational businesses? You usually see the stuff go the other way. Is that this is all, for estate planning purposes, not divorce planning, but estate planning. So what's the reason? And really documentation in these businesses is key. It really is. And so businesses it never ceases to amaze me how businesses are run. Some are run really well. Some are run, I don't know what you're doing over here. And so people think, and maybe you guys have seen this, having messy books helps them. I say the opposite, because if you've got messy books, your credibility with the court and the ability for your spouse to say, make allegations and you can't prove otherwise is worse for you. And I think people, I don't know, I just have thought, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I've
so
seen
many
people go the
businesses
opposite way.
Yeah, to your point, run their entire life out of the business.
I mean,
they want to rely on the K1 or the Schedule C as part of the income. So, and there's also then that's where the term net income available for support comes in.
Correct.
And so can you talk about that as it relates to the business valuation and the income stream?
Sure. So first, to kind of start with the premise of it can only be an asset or income. You can't double dip. So if we're looking at the value of the business, there's a value of the business, but there's also income to the business owner as net income available for support. You always want to make sure you're not double dipping in that way. And then the biggest two issues I see with business owners and net income available for support, maybe three, is reasonable compensation. Are you being underpaid or overpaid? Because it can go both ways. How is that determined? So depends on what you're doing for your money. Let me give you an example. Okay. I had a intergenerational family-owned business, and it wasn't my client that he was actually being paid relatively appropriately. His father was getting a very large salary. His father is retired to Florida, and yet he's getting paid more than my client. So the argument is my client's comp reasonable? Should he be getting paid more because he's doing more work and this person's getting paid more than him for doing less work? Well, that's an easy one. He's the owner, he's the founder of the business, so you can make that argument, but I think that he's the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak. He's the rainmaker of that business. So he's going to get more money because ultimately he's the reason that the business exists. So you can see reasonable comp go both ways. Also, you'll see, maybe the parents are overpaying their child because the child has a lifestyle that they want to continue to live, and the parents are indulgent and they own this business and money is good. And so they're willing to overly compensate their child. Because that's their way of just, I don't know, giving kind of a weird way of giving gifts, but via this compensation. the way that, but then what you'll see is, we always joke, it's called RAIDS, recently acquired income deficiency syndrome. And all of a sudden, I'm getting divorced. The business is terrible. Business is terrible. I have we lost our client. We have no money. I got to reduce my compensation.
Love that.
So it's like, oh, how convenient. You filed for divorce and now your business is, is in the toilet. That's, okay. How coincidental is that? And so let's look at, okay, well, did anybody else reduce their compensation? Only you? Everybody else getting paid the same? That's interesting. So that's going to be a red flag for me, and saying, and I will even say it to my own client, if I own the business owner, I'm like, this smells. If everybody reduced their salary, there's one thing. And then you have the issue. So that's the issue of reasonable comp, kind of those couple things there. Then you've got retained earnings. This is a big one with family businesses. And there's case law in Pennsylvania about that. There's probably case law in other states when it relates to support. And it's leaving money in the business to reduce the distributions. Because most business owners, as you guys are well aware, they get a draw, often a weekly or a bi-weekly draw, which is pretty low. And then they get distributions, either quarterly, annually, however the business does that. What I see is all of a sudden, someone's getting divorced, and now we're leaving all those distributions in the business and saying, oh, my comp is only my draw. That's it. I have no other money. That's it. We're making, business is bad. We're retaining earnings. Now, in a reasonable business evaluator is not going to say, in my experience, that 100% of your retained earnings need to be drawn down upon for support. There is an industry standard for most businesses, which varies as to how much money you should be left in the business at the end of the year. So usually a business evaluator, in determining a net income, if you hire someone to determine someone's net income for support, they'll say, okay, you should have 20% of this, you should have this much cash on hand. Another reason some people will have retained earnings is, we're going to buy equipment. We need to buy a new printer. We need to buy, I like a big printer. I don't mean, HP, little $99. I need to buy a printer. We need to buy a new piece of machinery to make X, Y, and Z product. That costs $100,000. That's a little bit more of a gray area. Because it's, okay, do you really need to buy a piece of equipment? Are you conveniently saying you're going to buy a piece of equipment? Are you just saying you're going to do it because you want to reduce your income available for support? And then the other fun thing is running personal expenses through the business, perquisites. What's the business paying for you? There are some things that are going to be okay as an allowable business deduction. But there are some things that I've seen, particularly in a family-owned business, where they're running literally everything. I had a case with a dentist, not my client, who had 3 dental offices, and he did not have a personal checking account. Literally everything went through these business accounts. It was a nightmare to try to figure out what this guy's income was available for support. Because and that's where I think also, going back to the point of, your messy books can get you into trouble, because if he had kept clean books and had separated, it would have been a lot easier on him. And I think would have been, he could have gotten a different result on the income available for support in his support case. But when you messy it up and you muddy it up like that, I actually think you're making it harder on yourself.
And are they exposing themselves to tax evasion or tax fraud by bringing that stuff into court? Is that executed upon?
So it's interesting, because I've had this conversation with clients all the time, is when someone comes to you with the messy books, with books that are not going to pass the smell test by the IRS. And I have had that with someone. It was revealed to me had a tremendous amount of a business that cash was still being used. He had tremendous amounts of cash in the business. The wife had pictures of the cash. So I couldn't say there was no cash when she's got pictures of rolls of cash in the top drawer of the, when they were together. So, don't, if you're trying to keep cash, maybe don't put it in the top drawer.
At least put it under the mattress.
At least put it under the mattress. At least, don't. And then also I tell clients, if you're on the other side, take pictures of the cash and date it. Put a newspaper underneath.
Yeah, we tell them that as well. But you know what you're saying as an attorney, I'm going to be your devil's advocate. I'm sorry, but that's what I have to do.
That's all right.
You're saying this, and what's so refreshing to hear you say is that you're a logical thinker, right?
Yes.
And you're really straightforward, and you're saying this is what we do and this is what we get. Unfortunately, Liz, what we see is, again, we're doing the financials and we see this uncover, and then we see get into the attorney's hands. And then when at the end of the day, when they get in front of a master's or get in front of a judge, it's like, well, we didn't have the documentation, client. We couldn't get you that income. Or you had the pictures of the cash, but you guys spent it during your marriage. So we can't really do that. So what really is a good strategy to have when you're, let's just say, the spouse in this scenario, going in there with the logic, with the knowing all of this and seeing it, and you being again, you're refreshing when you speak. So I'm happy to have you on with us today because it all sounds so like you know it, you got it, right? But unfortunately, and we have clients around the nation, is that what happens when you get there at that day and you can't, what is the best documentation for this person to have?
Yeah, and they have very limited funds. If they're not good.
They get beaten down, or they get bullied, or they get, pressured into this. It's frustrating.
And that's always the hardest part because, as you know, there are no public defenders for divorce cases. So, and there are no public defender like business evaluators.
Very interesting.
People who are determine a net income available for support. Everything is money. And I was just on the phone with someone last night, and I think I've said this to you guys. I always do a cost benefit analysis with my clients. Don't spend $5,000 to get $5,000. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. I know you guys do that as well with your clients. So it's also, well, what can I, and so part of it is being very honest with the client and saying, what can I prove? What can you afford for me to prove? I can't subpoena every bank this person's ever gone to. But what I tell clients in terms of what can you do to help yourself, it's a couple things. And they're free. You got to be organized. But what I tell clients is if you know you're going to be separating and you're still in the house, you need to act like a private investigator in some ways. So a couple ways you can do that. If you are the spouse who doesn't know about the finances, either because of a business or even just, where my banks, I've had people come in who don't know where they're banking. It was shocking to me when I started this job. I have to be honest with you. What bank are you? What bank? I don't know. It was shocking. I just as someone who's interested in personal finance, is very involved in my own personal finance. And I didn't see my parents run their marriage like that either. So it was very interesting, but it's very common. So you got to act like a private investigator. You see an envelope come in from a company that you don't know, from a financial institution that you're like, I don't have an account at Fidelity. You take a picture of it. You have a safe at home. You take a picture of the contents. You see I had a client who, she took pictures of bank envelopes that were in the safe. And so what I did was, I asked the other side when I didn't get statements from those banks. Hey, where does your client have an account at Meridian Bank? Does your client have an account at this? I at least could ask the question. I at least had an ability to go and ask that question.
We say the same thing. We don't care if the statement's outdated or not. If it has numbers on it, you take a picture.
Exactly. Other is if you're still living in the house, make copies of the documents. I know, obviously now so many things are digital. And so it's either maybe, if you have a family computer and the tax returns are on there, make sure I'm not saying steal it, and not leave a copy for the other person. Everybody should have both copies. Everybody should have a copy, but download it, make a copy if it's a physical document. However you can get as many financial documents before the split, because it's a lot easier. I always tell my clients, it's a lot easier for me to get it from you than it is to get it from the other side.
Yeah.
And the thing that your clients probably, go through and it's called discovery. I think it's probably called discovery in most states, is it's really hard to keep saying, I know something's out there if I don't have a thread to show to a judge that it is. That's why you got to act like you got to help yourself. And a lot of getting divorced, particularly the financial side, is organizing yourself, getting your experts, whether it's, getting your divorce, I call it your divorce
team. Yeah.
And that's, your lawyer, your real estate appraiser, your financial analysts, your financial advisors, if that's something you need, a therapist, a life coach, a divorce coach, whatever it is, a business valuator, you need those people and organize them early, because you're also going to, the more time they have to suss out if there's cash, if there's a tax issue, because if you've signed a joint return and now you're saying that return is fraudulent, you have a tax issue. So maybe we talk to a tax lawyer or a tax accountant before we start going there.
That's why we believe that people should come to us before they even go to you, because if we get their financial portrait together and they go to you then for your consult, and they say, Liz, this is what we have, you get to do your job. You get to focus.
Exactly.
Instead of asking them, where do you bank? And they're too emotional even to answer, even if they know the answer.
Yep.
It's intimidating to sit in front of your attorney for a lot of people. So when they go with our document, you get to look at it and say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to help you.
Well, and that's, and I know everyone's consults are different, but I give I think you won't be surprised to know that I give very substantive information in my consults. My consults, I do charge for them, and I am providing a service, I believe, in that consult. The more information you can bring to me in that consult in a succinct way, like your financial portrait, the better, because I can sit there and ask questions off of that. We can have a productive, efficient conversation. And some people come to me and they're super emotional and they spend the first 15 minutes, maybe crying, maybe talking about the emotional side, and we can have that conversation as well. But being able to come to me with their financial portrait and say, this is what we have, I can then start asking questions off of that. Okay, I see you have a family-owned business. All right, tell me about that. And then
they feel empowered to tell you about it. They're already coming to the table a little bit more confident than they would if they didn't know anything.
Well, I think it's getting divorced, and as particularly if you have the income dependent spouse or the income, less knowledgeable spouse, maybe the one who wasn't in charge of the finances, and they feel like they're on an equal playing field now because they have that information and they're going, okay, I know about this too, not just you. Like I feel like I'm empowered to make a good decision for my case. My divorce lawyer understands me. They're saving money, which is always a good thing, and everybody always wants to do that. And they feel like at the end of the day, I always tell clients, at the end of the day, you need, however the case shakes out, you want to know what happened to you and why it happened. And you can only do that if you have all the information. Now, I've had cases and where they want to turn over every rock. And there's sometimes you got to call it. And that is hard for people because like with
they're
the
emotionally
cash,
attached.
But you got to call it. Like if you are, like I had one client, this is years ago, she swore up and down that the guy had an overseas account. This is before FBAR and before you had to disclose it on your tax returns. This was 2007, 2008. She swore up and down, and I looked. And the guy worked for a company that was based in England, and I really think that's where the confusion was. And I just was like, listen, like I can't look for this anymore. You're bleeding money on this issue. I can't find anything. I've got nothing. They say, there's a point where you just kind of have to call it. But I think people feel better calling it the clearer financial portrait they have.
Yeah, because they have clarity that they're going to be okay.
Yep.
And another little layer to this is if a lot of that work, to your point, can be done before, it's more amiable because once you file that divorce complaint, you've essentially declared war. So a lot of time the spouses are more, initially everybody wants to work it out. So they're more amiable sharing information and documentation because a divorce complaint or petition is very offensive language. And you can't help it. It is what it is.
It's just, I know. I had a client, I think I told you this story. I had a client once who wanted to get divorced. He was like the catalyst for it. We had been working out agreements. We were doing it. I always call it a backwards divorce, kind of, what you're going to, where you work out, you talk about the finances before a complaints file. I call it, it's
so
doing
important.
it backwards, which is good. Backwards is good, actually, in divorce cases. And we filed the divorce complaint, and I sent it to him, not thinking, I didn't think anything of it. And he calls me up and he's all upset. He's like, I'm the defendant. I was like, well, somebody has to be. Yeah. I didn't even think about it. I didn't think I'm like, well, yeah, you are being sued. I mean, you are being sued for divorce. That is.
Well, that's the word. That's the word that the spouse gets. I'm suing you. Well, no, I'm not suing you. Well, actually, in legal terms, you are. But the everyday person going through a divorce doesn't think they're suing the other person. We think of it as a very different term.
Well, and also, especially in Pennsylvania, especially some states, you almost can file it as like a mutual consent, like Wisconsin does that.
Florida, I think, is another one.
Yeah, so they have different tracks. It's like if you guys are filing together, if you're filing together with kids, if you're not filing together. Pennsylvania is not that way. Someone has to be the defendant. Right. And so, but it's funny because been doing this job for 12 years. So you learn, now I always kind of caution clients, like, you are the defendant. It is okay. You are not, it's not making you bad. Like, that's a common question that clients ask me is like, oh, is it bad if I'm not the one that files? Or is it bad if I am the one that files?
Yeah. Like, you're actually saving money if you're the defendant,
It's just really kind of just how it has to be. But like, but I think we've talked about this, offline, is that alternative dispute resolution is really popular right now, particularly because of COVID. Because it was hard to get into the court system. It's back up and running to some extent, but not everywhere, not every state. Pennsylvania is in one place, whereas maybe, Texas is in another place.
Right.
And, California.
Change tomorrow. Yeah.
Change tomorrow. So alternative dispute resolution is really hot, as it can be done over Zoom. And with mediation, if you want to go to mediation, that means you guys are already amicable. So why not come with a joint financial portrait to show this mediator?
Yeah, because if you don't, mediation has a very high likelihood of failing because you don't financially know what you want.
Yeah.
And what you want.
Yeah. And family-owned businesses are tough. And I just had a conversation about mediation and a family-owned business, I think yesterday. And it's a question as to whether or not this wife is going to look at that as really an income stream or, let it go.
Let's talk about that. That's what's on my list to bring you back to. So I'm glad you went there.
Yeah.
It's really hard to digest. And even for myself personally, as a CDFA, when somebody owns a business, that you're going to say, let it go as an asset because you're using it as an income stream.
Right.
So let's just take the case of Karen and I are getting divorced.
Okay.
Which we're not, are we, Karen?
Right. Not today. Not today.
Right. I just wanted to make sure she was paying attention to me. So we're together 20 years and we have a business, and now I'm going to pay her support, but I'm only going to pay her for 5 years because that's what the agreement is. So now I'm paying her support, but you're telling me that she has to give up the business value. So in 5 years, her support's done and I still get to keep this business. So how is that fair and equitable? And is that really the scenario?
Well, it depends. So I know every lawyer says, right?
It depends.
So it depends on whether there may not be a value to the business. It may have only ever been an income stream.
And so it's only that.
Again, it's business experts are key often in times in that. Some businesses are obvious, and they're obvious to me, I should say. So if it's a one-man band, general contractor, painter, landscaper, the hairdresser example where they're an LLC, but
restaurant owner.
Restaurants, maybe restaurants that they're, it depends. Do you own the building that the restaurant is in?
Right.
Are you the chef?
Well, let's take that scenario. You own the building, and you own the business for 20 years, and now you're getting a divorce, and the spouse who doesn't work there wants to be an owner and have a support payment.
Okay. They want to stay as an owner of the business. Okay.
Or they want to buy out from the business and they want support.
Right. So I would say in that example that you're going to have that business valued. I think that there is, when you do a business valuation and there's also going to be a support component, that person's reasonable comp is taken out of the value of the business.
That's what everybody
don't
wants
want
to know. That's
yeah, because you cannot double, I'm like making a hands, you can't double dip.
Yeah.
So the reasonable comp is actually a liability of the business. That sounds bad. It's like it's a debt, but it's not. Like it's what you pay your
It's your CEO.
Yeah. So he's got whatever his reason. So in some business valuations, they will adjust reasonable comp up or down. And so that will, whatever they determine to be reasonable comp will be deducted from the value of the business because you can't get it twice. If it's only an income stream, there's no value to the business. It's just income. And then you just go down the track of support, whether there's child support, there's alimony. And then, if the alimony is for 5 years, it's over.
Okay, can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
So this is really good information for everyone listening, because these are common questions that the three of us may know, but when you're listening, it's confusing. So now we have a business and it's worth $1 million, let's say.
Okay.
And we're going to take a reasonable comp of $200,000 a year out of that business. So what the evaluator will do is they take the value of that business, they deduct that comp.
Right.
Because that's that's being used for support. And now there's a net value to the company, and that can be divided in equitable distribution.
Correct. Yep. And then it's also, but then the fun part is how are we going to divide that business up? Because oftentimes that is the biggest asset of the marital estate.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's take usually you probably have a house. And then you maybe have a 401k, maybe there's 2 401ks. You probably, I have to tell you, most people don't have that much cash.
Right. They pay out over time.
There's just not the cash there. So and the business itself. So the couple ways I've seen it done, and these are things I think, I know we talk about with clients is there a way to give you other assets in the marital estate? So say it's 800,000. So now it's a 50-50 split. So we both need to get $400,000. Is there other assets to compensate the non-owner spouse? If there's not, or we don't like that distribution, let's say they don't want to keep the house, the business owner also wants to keep the house. Well, we can't use the house now because now we're just down to maybe retirement. Well, the non-business owner doesn't want only retirement. There's no cash there, and they can't tap that until they're in their 60s and they're, let's say, 45. So that's not doing them any good today. So what I've often done is we'll do a payout. Sometimes the business owner I have seen will get a loan on the business, which is fine. They'll collateralize the business with a line of credit to buy that person out. And maybe they can do the whole 400,000 that way, usually not. So maybe they can get 100,000. So the agreement is, okay, I'll give you 100,000 as of the execution of the agreement. Property settlement agreement for the listeners is the agreement that says how we're going to divide everything up. So maybe I can get you 100,000 within 30 days based on that line. And then I've got, now I owe you $300,000 more, and I make, quarterly payments, monthly payments. Those are not support payments. And you got to be clear on that.
And you can include an interest on that too.
Include an interest. Well, and then also if you want to get really in the weeds on it, it's like, okay, you owe me $300,000. What if you drop dead tomorrow?
You need insurance.
Insurance.
Right.
So many
let me back that up again, because using this scenario, and you brought it down to 400,000 needs to go to each party for equitable distribution or your division of your marital assets.
Right.
To be clear, the $400,000 that the one spouse is being bought out who will no longer have an ownership, that does not get included or calculated for income purposes imputed on that side, right? That's
correct. No, it does not. However, because then that would be a double dip if you did that. So that's why.
However, to be clear, if the spouse is considering for emotional reasons or for detachment reasons that, you know what, I don't want the 400,000, I want to be a 50-50 owner.
Right.
If they remain a 50-50 owner, then wouldn't any income she receive or he receive off of that be imputed for income?
If they're still working at the business and getting a paycheck, that paycheck is income available for support, sure.
Or if you
any distributions, yeah.
Right, because if you're just remaining 50% owner.
Yeah.
So to the listeners, be careful. I know that a lot of times emotionally you want to stay attached to the business because maybe you don't want the divorce or you think it's going to be worth a lot more money down the road. That would be income for you. So it would affect your support payment.
And what I would suggest if someone's going to stay on, and I don't see it very often, I think sometimes people in the beginning think they're going to do it. I think they want to, especially if it's a business that they like built together, you know, and it's been blood, sweat, and tears, you know, a small business, you know, then they want to stay on. And I get that, particularly if they have no earning capacity, maybe outside of that business. They're worried about being able to go and find another revenue stream, depending on what the kind of business it was. You know, I've had people who, but for being in a family business, there would be no ability to make the kind of money that they're making because that's all they've grown up in that business. That's what they're qualified to do. So that happens also with spouses. I don't think generally exes should be business owners. I would generally counsel my client against that. If you are going to stay a business owner, you need to have a partnership agreement, a shareholders agreement, however your business is, whatever corporate structure your business has, you want to have something in writing as to how this is going to go going forward.
And Liz, that should be done before the divorce agreement is signed.
Yes, or part of it. So what I've done, so I have some clients where they've stayed business partners in real estate. That's a very common one. That's probably the most common that I see. Because you can be partners in a real estate business and a rental property, but you don't really have to deal with each other on a day-to-day basis. So in those cases, you know, we will do a partnership agreement and it's in conjunction with the property settlement agreement. It's a separate document, but they're all being signed at the same time. And it's, you know, because it's even people don't think about it. And also what people think, oh, well, we get along right now, so it's going to be fine.
Or they promised me.
They promised me. We get along right now. And that's great. And I always hope that lasts, but it doesn't often. And I had a guy years ago say, oh, my ex and I used to get along really well. And all of a sudden now she's giving me a hard time. And I said, did you get a girlfriend? And he said, yeah, how'd you know? And I was like, oh, so third parties come in, maybe you get remarried. They don't like that you're still a business, you know, owner. What if someone wants to be bought out later on? How's that going to look? What if someone dies? How does that look? I mean, there's a lot of, you know, one of my favorite phrases is rife with peril. There are certain things in divorce cases that people want to do that as lawyers, I have to say, whoa, let's put on the brakes here and like work through this. Yeah. And I know you guys do the same thing. It's, you know, particularly I'd say with probably the people's expenses, like I want to go buy this house. And they're like, well, let's put on the brakes. Like, do you have the cash flow for that? Mine is that sometimes, but it's also like, whoa, let's talk this through. It sounds really nice and that you want to keep living in the marital residence with your wife until your last kid turns 18. I have one of those right now. Yeah. But how is that? What's that going to look like?
Yeah. These are the things
play out
these scenarios, consider, right?
Yeah. Like what if someone, you know, there's so many things. And I think as divorce professionals, my clients and your clients, they all benefit from the horror stories and the missteps of our other clients.
Yeah.
And so I can, you know, a lot of my advice is based on what I've seen other people do and it's not worked. So, you know,
so there's a ton of information and we can go on forever about this.
Oh my gosh,
I'd like to put it out there to the viewers, if you don't mind, Liz, is that, listen, there's a lot of questions. If you have them, send them in. We'd love to do a follow-up podcast with
that'd be great.
To answer these questions because they're really important and we certainly can't handle it all in this half an hour. But at the end of the day, I think having the financial clarity, knowing what your options are, and stop listening to everybody that's chirping in your ears. Listen to your team of divorce professionals.
So important.
That's what they're there for. And then you'll make the right decision for you and your family.
Yeah.
Right. And then the podcast listeners can't see my face, but I'm like preaching, you know, hands up because not every divorce is the same. Your friend's divorce is not your divorce. And please listen to the people that you are paying because we are not, I think people just they think we're here to take them for a ride, but I know I'm not, I know you guys aren't. And we have the knowledge and the expertise to help you. Please use it. I had a client say to me yesterday, well, I'm just going off of what I saw on TV. I was like, well, that show's from California. So wrong, and so please listen to your experts, because you're only going to be financially better off. And my thing I always preach is you want to get to that best post-divorce life. And the only way you can do that is setting yourself up for it. And financially is a huge pillar of that.
Yeah. Karen had to leave us to something, but
that's right. Yeah.
So that's why she logged off. But it's really important. Have the clarity you need, ask the questions you need to ask. And you know what I love, Liz, is when clients come to us and get their financial portrait, and then we get to align them with attorneys like you. They get to see that you're there for the right purposes, because you get to actually set out a strategy with them. And this way they know they're paying you to do what you're trained to do, with that clarity, which is so important. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean,
it's with attorneys like you, because
that's needed. I really appreciate that. And my goal has, and I think, there's so many characters out there of divorce lawyers, but my goal has always been like, I'm not here to take all your money. I'm not here to scorch the earth. And I want to keep families in the best position they can. And having the tools to do that, with you guys, helps me have those tools, helps our clients have those tools. Everyone, as best as you can have a good divorce experience. That's how you can do it, is setting yourself up and preparing yourself. And, it's hard to leave the emotion. Let us be you can be emotional. Let us take the emotion out of it for you. And then help you make those decisions. And the only way you can make those decisions is knowing what you have and how to move forward, and strategy. Having a strategy in the beginning is so important.
Yeah.
And you can only have that if you know what you got.
Right. And it's way easier to keep track like that.
Exactly.
So thank you for being with us today. And again, send in some questions. Liz would be happy to get on again with us to answer those, which is the best way to get the information that you need. We'll have your information available for our viewers to contact you. And you're in Pennsylvania, and are you New Jersey also? Just Pennsylvania?
I am Barton, New Jersey. I don't really do too much there. So I'm best with people in the suburban Philadelphia area, but I can answer any Pennsylvania questions for sure. If there's a state that if it's you're out of state and you need a divorce lawyer, I know a lot of great lawyers out there as well. More than happy to connect you to people. I want people to have a good experience. So I like to do that connection if I can.
Great.
And so but yeah, any questions, I'm happy to answer them. The more information, the better.
Great. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening to us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Bye.